The sun was sliding low across the ridges, dragging long shadows across the prairie. Heat still clung to the dirt, rising in faint ripples, though the sky was turning copper and violet. The rancher rode slow, hat tipped low, the weight of another day heavy on his shoulders. His horse's hooves made no sound against the dust except a dull thud, as if even the earth had grown tired of him. For months he had moved like this, between his cattle, his fence lines, his lonely cabin, speaking to no one but the land, and the land never answered. His silence had grown so thick it felt like armor. He wore it the way other men wore their guns. Each sunrise began the same. Each dusk ended with him staring into a dead fire, remembering a life he had long buried. Nothing broke through any more, until that evening, when a sound he had not heard in years cut the stillness apart. Laughter. It drifted from the direction of the creek, soft but clear, carried by water and wind. At first he thought it a trick, some echo of memory clawing back to torment him. He reined in his horse and listened, body stiffening. Laughter did not belong out here. Coyotes howled, cattle bellowed, men cursed. But laughter was something the land had swallowed long ago. His rifle rested in the scabbard at his knee. Slowly, without a sound, he drew it. Every instinct told him to ride the other way. Let whoever was there pass unseen. But instinct had never sat well with him. He pushed his horse forward, down toward the water. The creek ran narrow this late in summer, its edges cracked and thirsty, but still deep enough to catch moonlight. He crept close, stopped behind a cottonwood, and parted the leaves with his barrel. There, in the silver water, a woman was bathing. Her hair spread like dark ink across the surface, shoulders bare, skin catching light as though carved from river stone. She moved with no shame, no fear, as if the world had never taught her to hide. He blinked hard, as if the sight would vanish if he dared look too long. Yet it was not her figure that struck him, not even the trespass into his land. It was her face. He knew it, his throat closed tight, heart hammering as though years had folded into one instant. It was impossible. She belonged to another time, a girl he had once sworn to protect, who had vanished with smoke and gunfire, whose name he had whispered into empty nights. For years he had convinced himself she was gone, buried by the cruelty of the frontier. And here she was, alive, rising from his creek like some spirit the land had kept hidden. He lowered the rifle without realizing, hands trembling against the stock. The urge to speak her name caught in his mouth and died there. She turned, sensing him. For a heartbeat her eyes widened, the same eyes he remembered, but lined with something harder now. Sorrow, endurance, defiance. They stared across the space. Silence weighted heavier than any words. The sound of the creek, the distant call of night boards, the creak of his saddle leather, all pressing around them. She did not cover herself quickly or scream. She only held his gaze, as though waiting for him to decide what kind of man he was. He finally found his voice, though it rasped from disuse. "You shouldn't be here." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something unreadable, as if she knew the truth he hadn't spoken, that he had dreamed of this moment, dreaded it, and needed it all at once. "I could say the same to you," she murmured. Her voice was lower than he remembered, carrying miles of dust and hunger. He wanted to ask where she had been, how she had survived, what ghosts chased her, but his tongue betrayed him. Years of solitude had stolen the art of speaking freely. Instead, he turned his horse slightly, giving her shadow and space, but not leaving. "You're trespassing," he managed. She tilted her head, eyes catching the last burn of sunset. "And if I am?" The question slid under his skin like a knife. It was not challenge alone, it was test, plea, and warning all at once. He had no answer. The silence returned, thick with unsaid things. His mind fought to reconcile the woman before him with the girl he remembered. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, as though it, too, knew the weight of this encounter. Far off, coyotes raised their chorus. The horizon burned with the faint edge of an approaching storm. He felt the pressure of choice. Let her go back into night and lose her again, or bring her to the cabin, risk the trouble she carried, and face what had been buried. At last he cleared his throat. "Storm's coming." She studied him, unflinching. He nodded toward the ridge. "Cabin's a mile west." You can stay till it passes." For a moment she didn't move. Then, with quiet grace, she rose from the water, gathering what few belongings lay on the bank. Her every motion was deliberate, as though she'd already weighed the danger of stepping back into his world and accepted it. He turned his horse without looking back, but his ears caught her footsteps behind him. The storm muttered across the plains, promising more than rain. By the time they reached the cabin, the first drops were already darkening the dust. Neither had spoken another word, yet the air between them felt like a fuse, burning slow, ready to split their lives open. Inside, the fire would cast its light on two souls bound by history, both half ghost, both half alive. Whatever secret she carried, whatever pain he buried, the storm outside would be only the beginning. Rain hammered the roof in uneven bursts, rattling against loose shingles, seeping through gaps in the wood. The cabin smelled of smoke and damp earth, of long years without company. He lit the fire with hands that shook just enough to betray nerves, though he kept his face still. Shadows leapt across the walls, stretching tall and thin, turning the room into a stage for truths neither wanted to name. She sat near the hearth, hair still wet from the creek, wrapped in an old blanket he had pulled from the trunk. Her eyes followed the flames, never once meeting his. The years had carved lines around her mouth, but they were not lines of weakness. They were lines of survival, etched deep by hardship. He wanted to ask what had carried her to this lonely crossing, but every question felt like a trespass. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, slid one across the table. She accepted without thanks, though her fingers brushed the rim with a gentleness that betrayed exhaustion. He studied her quietly. The girl he had once known had been quick to laugh, quick to believe the world held promise. The woman before him seemed built of iron and silence, every word measured, every glance edged with caution. "You live out here alone," she finally said. "I do." His voice was low, steady, yet underneath lay a weariness he could not hide. "Why?" He took a long sip before answering, letting the heat burn his throat. "Because no one else would." Her eyes flicked to his, holding there for the first time since the creek. Something unspoken passed between them, something heavy with memory. He looked away first, ashamed of how much he wanted to hold that gaze. She leaned back, watching him through the flicker of firelight. "I thought you were dead." The words cut deeper than he expected. "So did I." Neither smiled. The truth was too bitter for smiles. He wanted to ask where she had gone, how she had survived when so many hadn't. But her posture warned him away. She was not ready to hand over her story, and he was not sure he was ready to hear it. So he filled the silence with small gestures, straightening a chair, throwing another log onto the fire, mending the distance with meaningless acts. But silence, like the storm, refused to stay quiet. It pressed in on both of them, until at last she spoke again. "You've got scars." He froze, then glanced down. The sleeve of his shirt had ridden up, exposing a jagged line across his forearm, another across his wrist. "Old wounds, poorly healed." He pulled the fabric back down. "So, do you," he said softly. Her lips parted, then closed again. The blanket shifted around her shoulders, as if to hide what the firelight had already revealed. Neither spoke further, but the acknowledgment sat between them like a third presence, undeniable. Later, when the storm reached its height, the wind shrieked against the cabin walls, and thunder rattled the windows in their frames. He stepped outside briefly to secure the shutters. When he returned, she was standing by the window, eyes fixed on the black ridgeline beyond. "Someone followed me here," she said. The statement struck harder than the storm itself. He set his jaw, moving closer to the window. In the distance, faint even through the rain, he saw it. Hoof prints cut deep in the mud, fresh, not his own. His stomach sank. He had been a fool to let her in without question. Whatever hunted her had now found him, too. Yet even as anger flared, it carried no strength. What he felt instead was resolve. For the first time in years, he cared if someone was taken from him. "Who are they?" he asked. Her face hardened. "Men who don't forget. Men who don't forgive." It was not enough, but he knew better than to push. Instead, he checked the rifle by the door, tested the chamber, made sure the lanterns were ready. She watched his movements with quiet attention. "You should have let me go," she whispered. Too late for that now. For a while, neither spoke. The storm began to ease, rain thinning into a steady patter, thunder rolling further east. Inside, the fire sank low, leaving the cabin in half shadow. She drew closer, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, her hair falling loose. He caught the faintest scent of river water and wood smoke. "Why didn't you leave me at the creek?" she asked. He thought long before answering. "Because I already buried you once. I won't do it again." Her breath caught, though she quickly hid it. The hardness in her eyes faltered, replaced by something else, something fragile, buried deep beneath years of running. She turned away, staring into the embers as though afraid of what she had let slip. Dawn bled slowly across the horizon, gray light cutting through the last clouds. He had not slept, nor had she. They sat across from each other at the table, the air heavy with fatigue and unspoken fear. She gathered her few belongings, moving toward the door. He rose, blocking her path with a quiet finality. "If you leave now, they'll find you. And if they find you, they'll find me." Her eyes narrowed. "So what are you saying?" He stepped aside, but not far. "I'm saying if you're going to run, I'm riding with you. And if you're going to stay, you're not staying alone." For the first time, her expression softened, almost disbelieving. The woman who had carried only herself for so long looked at him as though he were a miracle she didn't trust. She did not answer, but she didn't step past him either. Outside, the land waited, vast and merciless, yet strangely alive. The storm had cleared, leaving the air sharp, the soil damp, the horizon burning faint with promise. Somewhere out there, danger was closing in, and both knew it. But for the moment, in that quiet space, neither ran. The land wore its silence differently that evening. Where most nights the prairie lay quiet, this one carried a tension that made every leaf and blade of grass seem to whisper. The rancher moved along the fence line with his rifle slung low, eyes sweeping the ridges. She trailed a step behind, her presence steady but taut, like a bowstring stretched to breaking. They both felt it, the certainty that the storm outside the cabin had only been a prelude. Tracks had been found at dawn, carved sharp in wet earth, too many to ignore. He had counted at least half a dozen riders, maybe more, their horses heavy, their movements deliberate. Men like that did not pass through by accident. They had come with purpose, and the purpose was her. She had not spoken much since admitting someone followed, yet her silence told more than words could. Every glance she cast toward the horizon carried history. Every tremor in her hand when it brushed the stock of his rifle hinted at nights lived in fear. He wanted her to trust him with the truth, but trust was not something the frontier gave easily. It was won like land, through blood and sweat, and often at a price too high. By sundown, the riders showed themselves, dark figures on the far ridge, framed by fire in the sky. They sat still, horses restless beneath them, waiting, watching. It was a message. "We know where you are." The rancher felt the familiar heat of old battles rise in his chest, that dangerous mixture of dread and clarity. He remembered war years, remembered standing across from men he had once called brothers. Survival had never come clean. He had learned then that killing was sometimes the only language left to speak. "They'll come at night," he said, voice flat. She nodded, arms folded tight. Her face betrayed nothing, but her eyes were storm-lit. After a long pause, she whispered, "Their leader, he's worse than the rest. He doesn't stop. Not until he owns what he claims." That single sentence unraveled much of what she had kept locked. He heard the history in it, the weight of her escape, the scars left behind. He also heard the hopelessness she tried to bury, the fear that no matter how far she ran, he would always follow. He laid a hand on the worn table, steady as stone. "Then tonight it ends." Night fell hard and fast, bringing a moon sharp as bone. The cabin became a fortress, if only in spirit. He shuttered the windows, set lanterns where shadows could trick the eye, placed a rifle near the door. She checked his revolver with practiced movements, surprising him with the ease of her grip, the steadiness of her hands. She was no stranger to weapons, nor to the men who drove them. "You've fought before," he said quietly. Her jaw clenched. I've survived. It was answer enough. When the riders came, they came with the patience of wolves. Hoofbeats muffled in the dirt, lantern light kept low, their shapes sliding like shadows across the field. He and she waited inside, every muscle wired, every heartbeat counted. Then, a voice carried through the night, deep, rough, filled with cruel familiarity. You can't hide her forever. The rancher stiffened. The voice belonged not to a stranger, but to a man from his own past, someone he had once ridden with in darker times. Memory cut deep, nights of outlaw raids, blood spilled for coin, the shame he had buried under years of solitude. That man had survived too, and now their paths had converged again, drawn together by her. She looked at him sharply, reading his face before he could mask it. You know him. He did not deny it. Shame flickered in his eyes, but also something harder, the understanding that he had brought ghosts into his life long before she returned. The frontier never let sins go unpaid. Gunfire cracked suddenly, shattering the silence. Wood splintered at the cabin door, and the siege began. He shoved her down behind the table, returning fire with deadly precision. The cabin filled with smoke and sparks, the air choking with gunpowder. Outside, Hove's thundermen shouted. Bullets tore through the night. She crawled toward the back window, fired through the gap, dropping a rider who had tried to flank them. Her eyes burned, not with fear, but with a fury born of years denied freedom. She was not running this time. The battle stretched into a brutal rhythm. Gunshots, silence, shouts, then gunshots again. They moved together as if they had fought side by side their whole lives, his calm steadying her fire, her boldness sharpening his resolve. For a moment, amidst the chaos, he felt something unfamiliar. Not despair, not loneliness, but purpose. Then lightning split the sky, revealing the leader at the edge of the clearing. His face caught the light, and both froze. It was not just a pursuer. It was a man who had burned her past to ash, the man who had once led him down a road of blood. Recognition twisted the night into something unbearable. She trembled, hatred flooding her features. He stood rigid, haunted by guilt. The leader grinned through the storm, as though the years had been leading only to this moment. Thought you could bury me, the man called out, but you can't bury the devil you rode with. The rancher's heart slammed in his chest. She looked at him, eyes burning with questions she did not speak. Trust wavered between them, fragile as glass, waiting to shatter or hold. Outside, thunder rolled again, louder, closer, carrying the weight of a reckoning neither could avoid. Thunder pealed across the prairie, a drumbeat to the standoff that held both house and land in its grip. The leader sat tall in his saddle, a dark cutout against the flash of lightning, his grin wide and merciless. Rain began again, fat drops striking the dirt, spattering across the rifle the rancher gripped so tight his knuckles whitened. He had fought men before, but this fight was no ordinary clash. This was a ghost of his own past standing in flesh, a man who carried both their histories in his cruel smile. The woman rose slowly from behind the barricade, rifle in her hands, hair clinging wet against her cheek. Her breath came sharp, but her arms were steady. The fire in her eyes was not fear, it was recognition. The storm lit her face in blue flashes, every strike of lightning revealing the scars she had hidden, scars branded into her by the very man now circling them like a vulture. Drop the gun, girl, the leader called, his voice carrying through the rain. You know how this ends. It ends the way it should have years ago. You're coming back with me. She raised a rifle higher, her finger brushing the trigger. Her whole body trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of the choice before her. To kill him would mean victory, but also surrender to the violence that had marked her life. To spare him might mean death for them both. Her chest heaved, caught between rage and mercy. The rancher stepped beside her, his presence grounding her. Don't let him take the last of you, he said, voice low but carrying through the roar of the storm. His words were not a command but a plea, shaped by his own regret. He knew what it meant to kill for vengeance. He had buried too many parts of himself already. The leader laughed, a harsh sound swallowed by thunder. Look at you two, ghosts clinging to each other like driftwood. Ain't no mercy out here, not for her, not for you. The rancher stepped forward into the rain, rifle steady at his hip. His boots sank into the mud, every step echoing with the years of guilt he carried. Lightning lit the sky again, painting all three in stark relief. The broken man, the hunted woman, the predator who bound them. The leader drew his pistol quick, faster than thought, but the rancher was already moving. Shots cracked almost as one, fire leaping in the dark. Pain tore through the rancher's shoulder, spinning him, but his bullet struck true, grazing the outlaw's leg and staggering him. Horses screamed, mud churned, the storm itself seeming to scream with them. The woman rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the rancher as blood soaked his sleeve. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself upright, rifle still clutched tight. "Not yet," he muttered, refusing the ground's pull. The leader limped closer, hatred burning hotter than the wound. His pistol gleamed in the rain, arm raised. "You should have stayed buried, old friend," he spat. The woman stood, rifle leveled, heart hammering so loud it drowned the storm. Her breath came sharp, her finger trembling on the trigger. She could end it. She could end him. Every memory screamed for it. The nights chained, the years stolen, the face of this man in every nightmare. Yet the rancher's words echoed louder still. "Don't let him take the last of you." With a cry, she jerked the rifle away, firing not into man but into the sky. The shot cracked like defiance, tearing through years of silence. She chose not to give him that last piece of her soul. The leader snarled, raising his pistol to strike, but in that single breath the rancher fired again. His shot hit clean. The outlaw's body jerked back, weapon dropping into the mud. The storm swallowed his final sound as he collapsed, rain washing over his still frame. Silence followed, broken only by the steady hiss of rain. The other riders, leaderless and shaken, turned their horses and vanished into the night, swallowed by darkness. The prairie exhaled, as if the land itself had been holding its breath. The woman knelt beside the fallen man, her face unreadable. For years she had imagined this moment, imagined his death, imagined her hands pulling the trigger. And now he lay there, not by her hand but by the rancher's. Relief and grief tangled in her chest, impossible to separate. The rancher lowered his rifle slowly, every muscle trembling with exhaustion and blood loss. His gaze met hers, steady despite the pain. "It's done," he said, though his voice carried no triumph, only truth. She pressed her hand to his wounded shoulder, steadying him. For the first time since he had found her in the creek, her eyes softened. Not weak, not broken, simply human, stripped of armor. Dawn crept gray across the land by the time the fire burned again inside the cabin. His arm was bandaged, the wound raw but no longer bleeding. She moved quietly about the room, gathering what little food remained, her hands sure, her movements no longer those of a fugitive but of someone who belonged. He watched her, exhaustion pulling at his eyelids, but he did not fight it. For the first time in years, he let himself believe in tomorrow. When morning broke, they stepped outside together. The storm had washed the world clean. Grass glistened with dew, the air sharp and alive. The prairie stretched endless before them, but it no longer felt empty. He saddled his horse with slow, careful movements, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. She tightened the girth strap without asking, her touch firm but gentle. They did not speak of what came next, whether they would ride on or rebuild the cabin, whether the world would let them stay. It did not matter. What mattered was that neither of them stood alone anymore. As they rode the fence line side by side, the sun rose warm over the horizon, painting the land gold. The past still clung to them, but it no longer defined them. Between them lay something fragile but unbroken, forged not from innocence but from survival, from blood, from mercy. The prairie wind moved around them, carrying no laughter, no weeping, only the sound of hooves and the quiet promise of futures still unwritten.